Hello, everyone. Samsung SDS Logistics Division Market Intelligence Group will start webinar in May. Today's agenda. Special section prepared by Samsung SDS North America after presentation of ocean market trends and air market trends. Hannah Pro, who is in charge of market intelligence in North America of Samsung SDS, will explain the logistics trends resulting from the expansion of U.S.-Mexico trade. Today's webinar allows you to look at not only air and ocean trends, but also cross-border logistics trends between the U.S. and Mexico as well. So please look forward to it. Let's start today's webinar. First, ocean market trends. This table is the 2024 SCFI Composite Index and Freight Rate Forecast by route provided every month by Samsung SDS Logistics Data Innovation Group. After the freight rate rebounded in January and February, it showed signs of slowing down in March and April after the Chinese New Year. In May, reflecting the implementation of GRI on key routes such as North America and Europe, and the solid increase in demand, the composite index was forecast to be at 1870 points. Higher than the April performance of 1803 points. However, it was predicted that the points would gradually decline, with the points expected to be 1760 in June and 1561 in July. In particular, North American West Coast freight rates are expected to show the largest drop across all routes, from $3,538 per FEU in May to $3,041 per FEU in June. In this page, we will look at the latest market forecasts from global shipping research institutes such as Clarksons and Drewry. First, Clarksons' April report predicted that the container market will become more difficult as it enters the second half of 2024. This appears to be a statement based on the prediction that the current Red Sea crisis will end in the second half of this year. Through the Cape of Good Hope diversion, the container shipping market has enjoyed a situation where it has been able to absorb excess capacity or vessels, cushioning the impact of supply-demand imbalances. But this cushion will disappear after the end of the Red Sea crisis. In fact, during the first half of April, the number of ships transiting the Suez Canal dropped by 93%, with an estimated 670 ships bypassing the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa, which was analyzed to have caused up to a 12% increase in demand. Meanwhile, the table below shows Clarksons' April estimates of volumes, or demand, by key routes. Reflecting the recent strong purchasing demand from North America, Trans-Pacific eastbound from Asia to North America is forecast to grow by 7.4% YOY in 24, and transatlantic westbound from Europe to North America is forecast to grow by 6.6% YOY. Next up is Drewry's market outlook. In this April report, Drewry predicts that the end of the Red Sea crisis could be delayed until the end of the year. Looking at previous reports, predictions were made until the first quarter and then into the first half of the year. But this month, the forecast is gradually being delayed to the end of the year, which makes us think that the geopolitical situation in the Red Sea region may last longer than expected. Anyway, the longer the Red Sea situation is for half a year or so, the more the diversions will increase. And as a result, the supply-demand index for 24, which is an index of demand over supply, so the higher it is, the better the demand. Drewry has revised the supply-demand index to 78.7, an improvement of 3.8 points from our previous forecast. Finally, here is the market outlook released in April by Vesson Nautical, a U.S.-based shipping platform. Vesson projected that the average annual growth rate of container demand over the four-year period from 24 to 27 would be 3.1%, and if you zoom out to just 24, it would be 2.4%, which is more conservative than the 4.1% you see in Clarksons' table on the left. In addition, the company predicted that the Red Sea situation would gradually ease from the second half of 2024, and as a result, it expressed the opinion that freight rates would bottom out and then go through the difficult process of recovering again by the first half of next year. This time, Clarksons has updated its April report on the global container fleet. Compared to last month's forecast, this month's outlook, i.e. the year-on-year fleet growth rate of 9%, is up by 0.1 percentage points. If we look more closely, we can see that the forecast for annual scrapping in 2024 is 177,000 TEU, decreasing every month from the 549,000 TEU estimated at the end of the previous year. This is because the lifespan of old ships that have already been scrapped or are due to be scrapped is lengthening, as the fleet must be fully deployed to route detours, and it can be inferred that this situation is having an effect on increasing the rate of increase in fleet supply. Meanwhile, BIMCO, the Baltic International Maritime Council, announced on the 8th of May that a total of 1 million TEUs of new building deliveries have been made in the first 4 months of the year, up 80% year-on-year. In this page, we'll take a look at the supply and demand imbalance of containers. Based on Clarkson data, the percentages shown in the chart represent the year-over-year growth of supply and demand, respectively. Focusing on 24, we can see that supply grew at 9% and demand grew at 4.1%, resulting in a supply-demand gap of 4.9 percentage points, which is fortunate, or should I say fortunate, as this gap has narrowed from 7.7 percentage points in 23 and is forecast to narrow even further to 1.9 percentage points in 25. In addition, the total new buildings scheduled for the year will be a record 2.7 million TEUs. But as I mentioned, the positive flip side of the Red Sea incident is that the market is handling the increase in new buildings surprisingly well by putting them into the growing fleet for route diversions. Of course, this does not mean that the ultra overcapacity situation has been resolved, but rather that it is only a temporary reprieve, so it is not a situation that shipping companies can just sit back and enjoy. This section presents the SCFI Composite Index and route-wise freight rate changes published weekly by the Shanghai Shipping Exchange. The composite index declined for 6 consecutive weeks from the Lunar New Year holiday in February to the end of March, before turning upward in April, driven by stronger South America-bound volumes. In particular, the last week of April saw a sharp rebound in the composite index, driven by a rush of volumes before the Chinese Labor Day holiday scheduled for May 1 to 5, demand to ship before the May GRI, and strong volumes to North America and Europe. Specifically, the average for the month of April was 1803, and the figure announced on April 26, the last week of April, was 1941, showing a rapid increase. In particular, the Americas freight rates turned upward after 10 consecutive weeks of declines on both the West Coast and East Coast, with the West Coast reaching $3,602 per FEU, up 13.4% from the previous week, and the East Coast reaching $4,661 per FEU, up 14.5% from the previous week, driving the increase in the composite index. The SCFI index was not released on May 3rd, the first week of May, due to the Chinese Labor Day holiday, but the numbers released on May 10th will probably be even higher, reflecting GRI in North America and Europe. This is the KCCI Composite Index and route-wise freight rates released by KOBC, Korea Ocean Business Corporation, every Monday. Unlike the SCFI, which is calculated based on the volume from Shanghai, it is based on the volume from Busan, and the freight rate unit for each route is based on FEU for all routes. Please note that this is different from the SCFI, which is based on FEU only for North America and TEU for other routes. It can be said that the flow of freight rates is similar to SCFI, but in the case of KCCI, it has been falling for 10 consecutive weeks, from February 5th to mid-April, before turning upward. In particular, the composite index announced on May 7th showed a 14.4% surge from the previous week to 2,606 points, showing the recent strong market. This time, we look at the fleet capacity and market share of the top 10 global container shipping companies. At some point, it became familiar for MSC to be ranked number 1 in the world. It is said that it was in early 2022 that MSC pushed out Maersk, which had held the undisputed number 1 position for 25 years, and with aggressive fleet expansion, MSC became the first shipping company to exceed 5 million TEU in May last year. According to Sea Intelligence, given the current order book, MSC's fleet is expected to reach 7 million TEU by April 2026, cementing its leadership position. In addition, as you well know, 2M, which is being operated together with Maersk, is scheduled to be dismantled as of January 2025. What is surprising is that MSC alone is known to be able to operate the fleet on major east-west routes. Meanwhile, CMA-CGM, currently in 3rd place, is expected to catch up with Maersk and rise to 2nd place as of April 2026, based on the new delivery schedule in the order book. This is a graph of the weekly capacity deployed on the east-west route by shipping company and alliance provided by Alphaliner, a French shipping research agency. The weekly capacity deployed on the Asia-North America route on the left reached 520,000 TEU, a 2.4% increase compared to the same period last year. In the case of the Asia-Europe route on the right, you can see that MSC and Maersk, which are based in Europe, have market shares of 20.1% and 15.3%, respectively. Although this route increased by 8.6% compared to the same period last year, weekly capacity of approximately 470,000 TEU was deployed, which is less than that of the Asia-North America route. This is a global schedule reliability for major routes provided by Sea Intelligence, a Danish shipping research institute. The standard for schedule reliability is whether the carrier arrives within plus or minus business day from the scheduled arrival date. This is research data from more than 60 container shipping companies on 34 shipping routes around the world. The average schedule reliability on all global routes in March 2024 was 54.6%, with 51.5% in January and 53.1% in February, showing continuous improvement until March after the outbreak of the Red Sea incident. Perhaps this is the result of the delivery of new ships, which were scheduled to be delivered on a large scale, and as shipping companies naturally increased their fleets, detours through the Cape of Good Hope became routine, and the quality of service networks, such as feeder connections, improved. However, considering that the schedule reliability as of March 2023, a year ago, was 62.5%, and the level in November 2023, just before the Red Sea incident, was 61.8%, it can be said that there are still many rooms that need to be improved. By route, the North American West Coast is the best at 49.3%, while the North Europe route is the worst at 37.2%, perhaps because it is directly related to the Red Sea region. Meanwhile, as weather conditions in the Panama Canal area improve, restrictions on draft and daily traffic volume are being eased, and schedule reliability on the North American East Coast is expected to gradually improve. This page also looks at schedule reliability performance, but unlike the previous page, we're going to look at how carriers are performing on each of the major routes. In addition, since the shipping companies are displayed in the same color based on the alliance they belong to, you can refer to the distribution of schedule reliability scores, not only by shipping company, but also from the perspective of the alliance. By displaying the average schedule reliability separately on each route chart, you will be able to gauge the degree of schedule reliability of a specific shipping company on that route. It is noteworthy that Hapag-Lloyd's performance of the global route was 56.1%, which is higher than the average of 54.6%, and that on the North American West Coast and the North American East Coast, shipping companies belonging to the Ocean Alliance had superior performances. Let's look at the weekly ship waiting status at major ports in North America and Northern Europe. The May edition of the Global Port Tracker, published monthly by the National Retail Federation, NRF in North America, shows that North America continues to experience robust demand, with import volumes through major ports increasing year over year from January through September forecasts. According to news from Market, the ports of LA, Long Beach, representing the North American West Coast, and New York, New Jersey, representing the North American East Coast, should have been experiencing an increase in vessel calls, but with no significant increase in waiting vessels, they appear to be operating smoothly. The Port of Rotterdam, Europe's busiest port, 13th globally, has seen an increase in the number of vessels waiting since week 11 in early March due to the arrival of cargo loaded before the Chinese Lunar New Year holiday, and an increase in Mediterranean-bound transshipment volumes that are trying to connect to feeders after discharging in Rotterdam rather than calling directly due to increased transit times. This is the status of container handling volume for the month of March by major global ports. It is also called throughput, a concept that includes import, export, and transshipment volume. As mentioned earlier, Due to the strong demand for retail imports in the United States, the volume of cargo handled at major ports in the United States, including New York and Los Angeles, has increased significantly compared to the previous year. In particular, in the case of New York Port, it increased by 22.1% compared to the same period last year. One that stands out among them is Hong Kong. Hong Kong, which was once the best in maritime transportation, has recently continued to slump. The reason is that from the shipping company's perspective, calling at ports in mainland China such as Shanghai or Shenzhen is superior in terms of price and convenience, and it is expected that it will not be easy to reverse this in the future. Meanwhile, Hong Kong's March cargo volume fell 9.7% compared to the same period last year. Meanwhile, Busan Port is also showing some increase in throughput compared to the previous year. But according to recent news from the Lodestar, Busan Port was almost excluded from Gemini's future hub and spoke network. In addition, it is known that there are quite a few global shipping companies such as MSC that are trying to exclude Busan Port from their port portfolio. There can be many reasons, but I think productivity is a big factor. For example, in the case of leading overseas ports, 8 to 9 cranes work together when a container ship docks. But in the case of Busan Port, there are only about 3 to 4 cranes. And while Singapore Port handles 114 containers per hour, Busan Port handles 88, so there appears to already be a gap with the global level in terms of productivity. We've highlighted 3 of the biggest news stories in the maritime market during the month of April. First up, the easing of the Panama Canal restrictions. The Panama Canal Authority announced on April 15th that it will gradually increase the number of daily transit slots in the canal as the water level in Lake Gatun recovers. Currently, 27 slots are available per day, but from May 16, 31 slots will be available, and from June 1, 32 slots will be available. Considering that there were around 36 slots during normal operation in the past, it can be inferred that there is still further easing. In addition, from June 15th, water depth restrictions, also known as draft, are scheduled to be relaxed and raised to 13.71 meters. This will likely be a boon to ships that were subject to draft-related and weight restrictions. The second is related to new ship deliveries, which reached 11,000 TEU per day in April. According to Alphaliner, 50 vessels, totaling 330,000 TEU, were delivered in April. Simple calculations show that 11,000 TEU was steadily delivered per day. Of course, the year as a whole is on track for a record high of 2.7 million TEUs, but according to Linearlytica, the nominal year-on-year increase in capacity delivered so far this year on the major east-west routes is 10%, but only 3% in terms of effective capacity. So maybe it's not as much of a concern as some had feared. Of course, this is only when the Cape of Good Hope detour, which absorbs excess ship capacity, continues. Finally, and this is interesting, we see a warning from Sea Intelligence that blank sailing is down a lot. If spot rates continue to fall as they did pre-April, carriers will have 2 strategies. The first is to defend rates by reducing supply through the traditional method of blank sailing, and the second is to maximize profits by loading as much as possible without adjusting capacity. Given that rates are still high, recent trends suggest that carriers have significantly reduced the number of blank sailings, i.e., they are taking a load as much as possible strategy rather than artificially adjusting supply. However, Sea Intelligence warns that without blank sailing, carriers could face much more severe freight rate declines in the medium to long term. Now it is time to analyze major issues in the maritime market. This month, as it seemed timely, we summarized the content on U.S. Eastern ports labor talks and possible strike. In 2023, a dramatic negotiation was reached between the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, ILWU, and the Pacific Maritime Association, PMA, but it took about a year to reach that conclusion, causing great inconvenience and cost to global logistics. This time, negotiations are underway to renew the contract between the International Longshoremen's Association, ILA, and the United States Maritime Alliance, USMX, for longshoremen on the east coast of the United States, as it expires at the end of September this year. The ILA announced in July 2023 that it would immediately begin a large-scale strike starting in October 2024 if negotiations were not concluded within the expiration date. The 2 sides had already begun talks in September, 22 to discuss regional alignment, which were suspended for several months before resuming in February of this year. Once all regional consultations are completed, negotiations on the master contract will proceed. The three key issues are wage increase, port automation, and work allocation. With respect to wage increases, the ILWU is referencing the wage increase won by the ILWU at the West Coast ports last year, which totaled a 32% wage increase over the 22-28 period and a one-time bonus payment totaling $70 million to compensate for work during the pandemic. The ILA will use this as leverage, and while not specific, some expect a 40% wage increase. The port automation issue is an old one, with USMX pushing for autonomous driverless vehicles and automated cranes in the terminals to increase productivity. But the ILA has steadfastly opposed it at each of the previous contract renewals in 12 and 18, citing reduced employment stability. Lastly, in the case of work allocation, the ILA sued the South Carolina Ports Authority in 2020 for giving only non-unionized workers the opportunity to operate terminal cranes at the Port of Charleston. And in February of this year, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the ILA, which is expected to have an impact on similar cases in the future. With the U.S. presidential election scheduled for November this year, it would be a terrible situation for the Biden administration to imagine a strike occurring in October, right before that. Therefore, the market predicts that this situation will be favorable to ILA. If a strike were to occur in October, it would completely disrupt the already strained global supply chain with disrupted loading-unloading operations, increased lead times, inventory shortages, paralyzed supply of empty containers, and rerouting of transportation, which is something that should never happen, as even a 1 or 2 day strike could have a negative impact of more than 2 weeks, given the peak of December, the shopping season. Additionally, market participants such as shippers, shipping companies, and forwarders must prepare for any emergency. It will be necessary to secure inventory in advance or to discover in advance a multimodal transportation route for transport after unloading at ports in the western United States. Now, how do you view this situation? With less than 5 months left, I think we'll be seeing news related to this more and more frequently in the future. Also, I think there are many departments or people in charge who are directly related to work. If there are any important updates regarding this matter in the future, we'll once again analyze it in a timely manner. This is the end of the maritime-related information. Now here is air market trends for May. Let's explore the TAC forecast being predicted based on the System Dynamics model by the Logistics Data Innovation Group at Samsung SDS. I have previously given a detailed guide during the webinar in March, but let me talk again about the SDS forecast indicators. This model is based on system dynamics, a methodology that seeks to understand the impact of interactions between various components within a system on the overall behavior of the system. It models and analyzes the dynamic behavior of the system and includes the concept of time delays, which ensures that changes at a certain point in time can be reflected even after the change occurs. Sometimes the accuracy might be questioned if the forecast values do not match the actual values, but the most important thing is the trend of the freight rates forecasted. I hope you all enjoy the fun of seeing the forecast values generated by numerous data each month, and I will guide you through this month's forecast. Firstly, the freight rates from Hong Kong to the U.S. for the second quarter are expected to range between $4.70 and $5.60. For the third quarter, the rates are projected to be slightly lower, with a minimum of $4.30 and a maximum of $4.50. The fourth quarter is forecasted to have a minimum freight rate of $3.80 and $4.20. Similarly, the freight rates from Hong Kong to Europe are expected to range between $4 and $4.20 for the second quarter, with a minimum rate of $3.80 and a maximum of $3.90 for the third quarter. The fourth quarter is predicted to have a minimum rate of $3.70 and a maximum rate of $3.80. Next, let's take a look at the actual trend in TAC freight index. We will divide the graphs for the US and Europe destinations. You might be tired of hearing this, but the trend in freight rates continues due to e-commerce for the US and the geopolitical crisis in the Red Sea for Europe. Freight rates from Vietnam and India to both destinations have significantly increased. For the 18th week, the freight rate from Vietnam to the US increased by 9% from the previous week to $6.05, and the rate from India to Europe rose by 7% from the previous week to $4. Next, let's compare the TAC index with the cargo movement trends of major exporting countries. There are various factors that affect the rise and fall of freight rates. As the saying goes, economies of scale, indeed, large-scale factors predominantly drive the fluctuations in freight rates. Freight from India is largely influenced by fashion products, and freight from China is significantly impacted by e-commerce products. First, let's look at the graph in the top left corner. The freight from India to Europe has been consistently rising since January 2024. The average freight rate was $1.93 per kilogram in February, and it reached $4.02 per kilogram in early April, marking more than a doubling to the highest rate of the year. And the rising trend continues. The light blue bar graph represents the volume of fashion products from India. Fashion items account for 16% of India's air export goods. After the Red Sea incident, cargo volumes have been steadily increasing, and in February 2024, there was a 26% increase compared to the cargo volume in February 2023 before the Red Sea incident. Next, let's compare the trends in e-commerce cargo and freight rates from China to the US. The top-ranking item in China's air export goods is high-tech, followed by machinery, with e-commerce items coming next. To examine the e-commerce cargo, we will look at the volume of consumer goods and fashion products. These items make up 18% and 11% of the total exports, respectively, accounting for about 30% of the export cargo. We will see the changes in freight and cargo volumes through graphs. The year 2023, after the reopening following the 2022 shutdown in China, was a period of overwhelming boom for e-commerce from China. Both cargo volumes and freight rates showed steady growth. If the same trend continues into 2024, we need to prepare for a freight rate increase in the second half of 2024. In the last week of April, the freight rate already reached an annual high of $5.32 per kilogram. Furthermore, we must also make efforts to secure space. We will review the data released by World ACD. In the third week of April, global air freight volumes increased. This surge in volume was largely due to an increase in flower shipments ahead of Mother's Day in most parts of the world, which offset the slowdown in cargo traffic that occurred during the early April period of Easter and Ramadan holidays. According to an in-depth analysis by World ACD, the powerful rainfall in Dubai during week 16 led to the cancellation of most flights, and Dubai's cargo volume for that week fell by 18% compared to the previous week. In contrast, nearby Abu Dhabi and Sharjah airports showed increases of 20% and 103% in cargo volume, respectively, as a result of flights being diverted from Dubai. Furthermore, due to supply constraints caused by flooding on the Dubai to Europe route, the freight rates for week 16 increased by 10% from the previous week and rose by 18% compared to the same period last year. Next, let's look at the short-term outlook. Following the Houthi attack in November 2023, a geopolitical crisis emerged in the Red Sea. This crisis affected ocean cargo originating from South Asia, including India and Bangladesh, especially in apparel exports, where about 70% of the goods use this route. To mitigate the problem, routes were diverted around the Cape of Good Hope, or cargo was shifted to air freight, making the end of 2023 challenging. Now, in May 2024, let's see the trends in container freight and ocean reliability, comparing them to air freight rates. The wide sky blue area on the left graph represents ocean reliability. For those specializing in air freight who may not be familiar with ocean market-related words, it denotes the reliability of sea transport, primarily the ability of ships or cargo to arrive at their destination on schedule and in condition. The reliability in sea transport is determined by several factors, including adherence to schedule, safety of the cargo, and efficiency of the route. Before the Red Sea crisis, ships on the Asia-North Europe route were operating with about 65% timeliness, but after the crisis, it dropped to 60%, 50%, 40%, and as low as 34% in February. Fortunately, it has been improving, with an 8% increase in March compared to February, and by April, the SCFI Europe rates had also fallen by about 31% from the January peak, gradually stabilizing. Conversely, air freight rates from India to Europe began to rise after reaching a peak in January for sea freight and have been sharply increasing since February. The blue line on the graph represents the trend in air freight rates, which have surpassed $4 by week 15 from an average mid-$1. The increase in freight rates suggests a surge in cargo volumes due to geopolitical instability, ongoing diverse demands from shippers for adherence to delivery schedules, and the need to maintain a stable supply chain. Air freight demand is expected to continue its upward trend. Let's look at the cargo supply information provided by Seabury. Do you remember the discussion about supply changes due to the summer schedule for 2024 from last month's webinar? Seabury also anticipated changes in supply according to the summer schedule, which spans from March 31st to October 26 in 2024. I mentioned that additional passenger flight would be added to meet the demand of summer vacations. According to Seabury's analysis for 2024, the supply of international wide-body flights to and from the Asia-Pacific region will increase by 19% compared to 2023, but is still 15% below pre-COVID levels. Other regions have seen a 2% increase from 2023 but are still 1% short of pre-COVID supply. If you look at the top left graph, the pink dotted line indicates the expected supply during the summer period, with no dramatic changes. Considering the current demand, an increase in supply is anticipated. Next, let's explore the supply changes at Asian airports in the first quarter of 2024. There has been tremendous growth in capacity at airports in southern China over the past year, while most Asian hub airports have seen a reduction in charter capacity compared to last year. Airports primarily shipping e-commerce cargo, such as Hong Kong, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, have seen charter capacity increase from 30% to as much as 71%. Passenger flight capacity has also increased dramatically, Guangzhou by 130% and Hong Kong by 184%. The significant growth due to the increased demand for e-commerce and the surge in passengers due to the increased supply of charter flight is quite evident. Let's review the cargo demand and supply data provided by IATA, which you should be familiar with by now. CTK stands for cargo ton kilometer and is an indicator of air cargo demand, measuring the amount of cargo transported. ACTK represents available cargo ton kilometer and indicates the supply side by measuring the total capacity available for air cargo transport. CLF is the load factor, which is another key indicator. The closer the gap between supply and demand, the higher the load factor. Right. In March, the demand was 20 million ton kilometers and the supply was 37 million ton kilometers, resulting in a load factor of 53.8%. The important thing to note is that demand and supply are gradually recovering to pre-COVID levels. Next is jet fuel and fuel surcharge index. Today, I'll explain more about fuel surcharges, which are closely related to everyday life. As summer vacation approaches and you start booking flights for your summer vacation, from May onwards, the fuel surcharge, FSC, applied to passengers has been increased. Since the policy on fuel surcharges varies by airline, today's webinar will focus on Korean Air as Korean-flagged carrier. Fuel costs account for 20 to 30% of an airline's operating expenses. Therefore, when jet fuel prices rise, airlines incrementally increase the FSC as a measure to conserve fuel costs. Conversely, if jet fuel prices decrease, the fuel surcharges are lowered accordingly. Since a single flight can use hundreds of thousands of liters of fuel, airlines are sensitive to jet prices and employ hedging strategies to buy fuel in advance when prices are low, to manage the risk associated with rising fuel costs. This fuel surcharge was first imposed by a few major airlines, such as Singapore Airlines and British Airways in 2004 when international oil prices were rising, and now most airlines impose it. In Korea, the imposition of fuel surcharges has been determined by standards set by the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, and Transport since 2005, based on international oil price fluctuations. but the application is decided by the airlines. Now, let's return to the jet fuel in May. Jet fuel has increased by 1% compared to last month and has risen by 10% compared to the same period last year. While the passenger FSC has increased this May, the cargo FSC has remained unchanged. This is because passengers are subject to a 33-step FSC and cargo to a 34-step FSC, which are adjusted according to the 2-month average oil prices, explaining why the trends in fuel surcharges for passengers and cargo are not always the same. The peak season in the air cargo market typically refers to the third and fourth quarters. This has remained unchanged both before and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's explore why the latter half of the year is considered the peak season for air cargo. Production increases after the summer holidays in July and August, which is a gradual increase period for industrial goods such as automobiles, electronics, and machinery parts. Moreover, small and expensive goods are regulars in air cargo, especially during September and October, which coincide with the launch period for new electronic products like smartphones and tablets. As November approaches, we await Black Friday, followed by Christmas in December. Stores focus on stocking up for sales, and timely delivery is crucial for seasonal products. To give you a sense of the pressure of seasonal products, let me share our experience. Trend-sensitive products are often transported quickly by air. There's a story I always remember towards the end of the year. Many women know this. Cosmetics that are only released for the Christmas holiday season. I had to ship a limited edition eyeshadow to Paris from Incheon, which was more glittery and colorful than usual. It was so hard to get the space for this small palette that week due to lack of space. It was so time-crucial shipment because once it passed, the Christmas packaging would become meaningless. A direct flight from Incheon to Paris takes just 12 hours, but during peak season, the direct flight costs are incredibly high, so I had to book a flight via the Middle East. I remember waiting a long time at the stopover, and it was quite stressful. By the last week of December, there's a temporary increase in shipments as exporters manage inventory and strive to meet revenue targets. These various reasons are evident in the graph on the left. You can see the cargo volume increases every fourth quarter, and accordingly, the freight rates rise. What might the peak season look like in 2024? During the pandemic, airline supply constraints led to increased freight rates. Airports were closed, and staffing for operations was not possible, resulting in supply hitting rock bottom and supply shortages. However, by 2024, the supply is normalizing. IATA's supply figures for March show an 8.6% increase compared to 2019, and passenger levels have also returned to pre-COVID levels. Yet, there is still talk of a supply shortage. The supply shortage in 2024 is not due to airlines, but due to shippers occupying large amounts of capacity. Some e-commerce companies are implementing on-time delivery policies for aggressive marketing. They have introduced compensation for late deliveries and have highlighted fast shipping in their marketing campaigns. To adhere to this, e-commerce companies have started to occupy large quantities of supply, especially in 2022, when China maintained its zero-COVID policy and implemented very strict international entry and quarantine measures. It was almost closed off. With a reopening in 2023, a cross-border e-commerce boom started in the second half of the year. The 2023 peak season, met unprepared, was a difficult period with turbulent freight rates and hard-to-secure supplies due to challenging international situations. Recognizing this quickly, major shippers prepared for peak season operations with long-term contracts. Unlike the pandemic period when spot rates and short-term contracts were prevalent, the opposite situation occurred in 2023 and 2024, with shippers preparing for long-term contracts of 6 months or more to secure space for smooth operations. The proportion of long-term contracts in the third and fourth quarters of 2023 exceeded 50%. Forwarders participating in long-term contract bidding must have considered many variables. Shippers still hope for lower freight rates, while airlines are keen on peak season, making it a crucial moment for bid managers to make wise decisions. Another point to consider is the sustainability of e-commerce demand in air freight. High logistics costs compared to low-cost items are undoubtedly a significant burden for shippers. Therefore, it's often reported nowadays that e-commerce shippers are preparing logistics centers for localization, which seems to be a more logical direction to me. If logistics centers are prepared, air cargo can switch to ocean, and companies can significantly reduce logistics costs. Moreover, in the event of a Red Sea crisis, an alternative for the e-commerce crisis is the express ocean service, which is gaining interest among shippers. This service, typically taking 15 to 20 days from China to the USA, can be reduced to just 11 days. E-commerce has undoubtedly brought significant changes to the air freight market. The industry will grow even more, and wise shippers will seek sustainable methods. It is important for logistics professionals to read and prepare for the trends of the industry. This concludes the presentation on the air market sector. We have a special feature for this webinar. Samsung SDS is connected through a global logistics network that includes 56 hubs and over 300 sites worldwide. The Market Intelligence Group is part of this network, and we will strive to bring you news from various regional hubs. Today, as the first in this series, we plan to bring you live updates from the North America region. Presently, there's a noticeable uptick in trade between the U.S. and Mexico. Analyzing the U.S. import landscape, in 2020, China held a 19% share, while Mexico held 12%. In 2023, these figures shifted, with China at 14% and Mexico at 15%. Notably, imports from Mexico surpassed those from China for the first time since 2002. Consequently, Mexico claimed the position of the U.S.'s foremost trading partner last year, overtaking China. To elaborate on the expansion of U.S.-Mexico trade, it's essential to consider the impact of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, which came into effect in July 2020. This agreement has spurred a phenomenon known as nearshoring, a strategic move by companies to relocate manufacturing and production facilities closer to major markets. Nearshoring aims to trim transportation costs and expedite delivery times. You might have come across discussions about nearshoring in the news. This trend is further substantiated by the increased foreign investment in Mexico. In 2023 alone, foreign direct investment in Mexico surged to $36.1 billion, marking a noteworthy 24% rise from the $29.1 billion recorded in 2020. Such figures attest to the tangible momentum behind the nearshoring movement and its impact on bolstering U.S.-Mexico trade relations. Indeed, Mexico has emerged as an attractive alternative to China for numerous companies grappling with escalating trade tensions between the U.S. and China. Alongside the steady ascent of labor costs in China, this shift underscores a strategic response to navigate the complexities of global trade dynamics. Furthermore, the expansion of U.S.-Mexico trade is significantly influenced by the disruptions witnessed in supply chains during the pandemic. These disruptions served as a stark reminder of the criticality of establishing resilient and agile supply chains, particularly those with shorter distances. Commonly referred to as nearshoring, this recognition has propelled many businesses towards reconfiguring their supply chain strategies, with Mexico increasingly becoming a preferred destination. Given these factors, the trajectory of U.S.-Mexico trade is poised for further expansion. Forecasts indicate a projected increase of $300 billion in U.S.-Mexico trade by 2032, compared to 2022, contrasting with a projected decline of $197 billion in U.S.-China trade over the same period. The upcoming U.S. presidential election in November has garnered significant attention, particularly regarding its potential implications on trade dynamics. Regardless of the election outcome, expectations lean towards the continuation and even escalation of the U.S.-China trade conflict, with sustained tariffs on Chinese imports anticipated. Amidst escalating trade tensions between the U.S. and China, there's been a noticeable surge in China's endeavors to channel exports through Mexico. Container cargo volume between China and Mexico witnessed a striking 34.8% increase in 2023 year-over-year. Notably, January of this year saw a staggering 60% spike in volume compared to the corresponding period in the previous year. Such developments underscore the evolving trade landscape and the strategic maneuvers employed amidst shifting geopolitical dynamics. Next, let's look at cross-border logistics trends in U.S.-Mexico trade. Trucks play a major role in U.S.-Mexican trade, comprising 70% of the total trade volume. Railways contribute 12%, while sea transportation accounts for 11%. As of 2023, the number of loaded truck containers from Mexico to the United States stood at 6.22 million, up 48% from 4.21 million in 2020. The major port of entry for truck trade was Laredo, Texas, with 2.35 million loaded truck containers. It was followed by Otay Mesa in California, El Paso in Texas, Hidalgo in Texas, and Nogales in Arizona. The demand for cross-border logistics is projected to grow further, aligning with the anticipated rise in U.S.-Mexico trade. Should China's bypass exports through Mexico increase, it's anticipated that the logistics flow between the U.S. and China via sea and air routes will transition towards U.S.-Mexico cross-border logistics accordingly. Next on this slide, we'll examine the responses of logistics companies to these shifting dynamics. Major logistics companies are responding to growing demand by establishing or expanding logistics facilities near the U.S.-Mexico border. The map on the left shows investments made by logistics companies such as Maersk, C.H. Robinson, and DHL within the last year or so. While preparing this data, there was news that Ryder, a major trucking company, is opening a large logistics facility in El Paso. So investment in logistics facilities near the border is very active. The railroad industry is trying to provide faster and more reliable services through intermodal services that connect all three North American countries. For example, UP, CN, and GMXT, the main railway companies in the three North American countries, launched the Falcon Premium Intermodal Service in 2023. Likewise, CPKC, CN, and Ferromex have introduced Mexico Midwest Express services last year. Finally, logistics companies are expanding their in-house customs brokerage services, often through the acquisition of customs brokerage firms. Due to the nature of cross-border logistics, customs-related tasks will occur. Customers tend to prefer end-to-end services through a single channel, so most three-place companies already offer in-house customs brokerage services, but they are strengthening their service capabilities as cross-border logistics demand increases. In addition to meeting customer needs, companies can diversify their revenue channels and ensure stability. Unlike shipping and trucking rates, which fluctuate depending on the industry cycle, the fee for customs brokerage services is somewhat fixed, so relatively stable profits can be expected. For example, if you look at C.H. Robinson's sales in the fourth quarter of 2023, sales in the maritime sector fell 17.2% year-on-year due to a contraction in the transportation market, while sales in the aviation sector fell 11.5%, but sales in customs brokerage services fell only 3.1%. I briefly talked an overview of the logistics trends resulting from the expansion of U.S.-Mexico trade. I hope it offers some insight into the market. Thank you. Here is the final chapter of webinar. Here is the ocean trend summary. The key phrase is rocketing freight rates. This is because, riding on strong demand in North America and Europe, carriers have implemented GRI, general rate increase, leading to a sharp rebound in freight rates starting in May. Meanwhile, Drury has predicted that the Red Sea crisis will not end until the end of 2024. In this potentially prolonged new normal, route diversions have become routine, and carriers are showing a trend of gradual improvements in schedule reliability. Here are the air freight trends. The countermeasure for the 2024 peak season is securing capacity. The impact of the Hormuz Strait blockade on air market is minimal. The supply of international air cargo has not only recovered but has increased by 5.3% compared to March 2019. Sea-to-air conversion cargo from South Asia and e-commerce demand from Asia continue to show strong performance. Due to this, the 2024 peak season is expected to face supply shortages depending on the shipper's share of the supply. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.